Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a type of video that I don't do super often, which is kind of odd considering this is a book-centered channel. So today I thought it would be fun to sit down and give you guys some book recommendations, and I figured for the month of February, what would be a better book recommendations category than fantasy romance. So I have 9 books that I want to talk about today. I love all of these so much. They are all so cute, so fun, very whimsical vibes in most of these. So I really hope you guys are excited for some recommendations, something a little bit different. And let's just get into it. I'm not going to be pulling these in any particular order. I'm just gonna see what comes off the top of my stack. So the first one that I want to talk about is a book that I read last year, and that is Paladin's Grace by T. Kingfisher. I have read many of T. Kingfisher's books at this point in time, and I think her fantasy romance books definitely remain my favorites of the ones that I've read. Paladin's Grace is following this ex-paladin whose god died, and he's kind of trying to figure out what to do with his life, and he runs into our other main character who is a perfumer, and they kind of just hit it off. I love their relationship so much. They do end up getting kind of embroiled in this wider scheme, people being framed for things, them being pulled into it even though they don't really have much to do with it. There's also this whole B-plot going on the whole time of this mysterious serial killer going around like cutting the heads off of people. So it definitely has a little bit of a macabre tone to it at times, but it's still like also a fun fantasy romance as well. I just think this book is just such an interesting blend of a lot of different elements, and I loved the feeling, I loved the vibe. I also just really enjoy the relationship between our two main characters. They are also a little bit older than the typical protagonist that you find in fantasy romance books, so I really enjoyed kind of their different perspective on life and the way that they were approaching their relationship. It just felt so much more realistic and normal instead of like this intense passion, like people being absolutely insane because they love each other so much, which is fun at times. But it's also nice to not have that, and I feel like this book definitely provided just a different perspective on the typical fantasy romance. So really enjoyed Paladin's Grace. I have not continued, well, I've like kind of continued on the series. I've read half of Paladin's Strength. Cannot say I recommend Paladin's Strength. It has not been my favorite thus far, but I do plan on continuing the series. I would really love to read books 3 and 4 because I've heard great things about, I think, book 3 specifically. So I will be continuing the series, but I did really love Paladin's Grace. Also, our main character, the ex-paladin, his name is Steven. He knits socks for him and his bros, which I also love. Like, as a fellow knitter, especially now, love that. The next thing that I want to talk about is actually a manga series. If you've been around here for a while, you probably already know what I'm going to recommend, but I just need more people to read the series because it is so good. And that is, of course, Yona of the Dawn. I had to pick one of the most stunning covers that I had. Look at them. Like, if this does not convince you to read it, I truly don't know what will. But basically in this series, we are following our two main characters, Yona, who is a princess, and Hawk, who is her bodyguard. It's so stunning. But due to some turns of events, Yona ends up having to flee her kingdom, and Hawk obviously goes with her. And they end up embarking on this quest, which involves these mythical dragons. There's a lot of politics brought into the series as it progresses. It's also so slow burn. It is painful at times, but like in the best way possible. This is like 45 volumes, I think, at this point in time. When I read it, it was maybe in like the late 30s. And I literally binged all 38 volumes in the span of like 2 or 3 months. It was such a time. It was such a special time, honestly. Like the months where I was binging Yona of the Dawn, some of the best reading months I've had, honestly. So if you guys want a new fantasy romance manga, but it's got like good plot, good politics, good mythical stuff going on, would highly recommend Yona of the Dawn. You guys already know I love the series, but like if you haven't picked it up, you totally should. I must say though, don't let the first volume deter you. I know that's annoying to hear. I know people don't like hearing that. But I think, especially with like a manga, you need to give it longer. Cause like one manga volume, not a lot of plot and story development, but like I feel like it really hits its stride like volume 3, 4, whatever. So I feel like that's a fair amount of time to give it to like get going. Cause I know some people read the first volume and they're like, what's going on? Just keep going. That's my recommendation. Love you, Yona of the Dawn. My next recommendation is a little bit of a historical fantasy romance, kind of sillier, goofier time, and that is The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love by Indy Holton. This is actually the first book in a series of like silly, goofy fantasy romance kind of books. A little bit less heavy on the fantasy aspects than some of these, but definitely does still have those magical aspects to it. In this series, we are following our two main characters who are both ornithologists, and they are competing in this competition to track down down this like rare and mythical bird. Initially, they are each other's kind of #1 competitor, but as the book progresses and as they're kind of put into this forced proximity, they're going after the same thing, so obviously they're kind of in the same place a lot of the time. And as they start to like bond over their love of ornithology, like nobody loves birds like they love birds, and this whole thing. It is so fun. They have such fun banter. I love the way that India Holton takes typical fantasy romance tropes and like does the most ridiculous thing you could possibly think with them. And it is truly a reading experience like no other. If you're not in the mood for like a silly goofy time, would not recommend this book. But if that sounds like it could be up your alley, I would recommend, because like it is one of the most fun books that I've read in such a long time, and I would give it a reread. Also, the third book in this series is coming out in April, which is very exciting. I did like the second book that's in this series. It's kind of like a supernatural, like magical storm chaser kind of thing. Like they have a good dynamic too. But the first book for me is my clear favorite of the series so far. But I'm very intrigued to see what the third one is like. It is called The Antiquarian's Object of Desire. Have you ever heard a more stunning book title? I don't think so. So very excited about that, but I would recommend this one highly. Kind of sticking on my like silly goofy theme here. This is like another, like if you don't want a silly goofy book, really don't read this. But I read this whole trilogy like 2 or so years ago, and I had such a fun time with it. Like it is so ridiculous, but it's so fun. And that is the Villains and Virtues series by A.K. Caggiano. This is the first book, Thrown in the Dark. This has been, I believe, recently trad published, like last November maybe it got trad published. But I do thankfully have the stunning indie cover of it. I do like the trad published one, but I also do really like this one. But anyway, this series is about our 2 main characters, Damien and Amma, and Damien is kind of like, he's like an evil guy, but like he's not really that evil, honestly. Like he's trying so hard to be evil. Honestly, like, I heard somebody compare Damien to, like, Gru from Despicable Me. I don't want to say it's apt, but, like, it's a little bit apt. So there's an odd comparison for you. But at the beginning of the book, he ends up embarking on this evil quest to, like, finally complete all of his life's work. But through some turns of events, he does acquire a traveling companion, who is our other main character, Amma, who is one of the, like, sweetest, bubbliest, cheerful characters you could possibly want to read about. And she is such a good counter to Damien. Definitely very cliche, grumpy sunshine kind of dynamic, but I feel like A.K. Caggiano also does a really good job at taking like those typical fantasy romance dynamics and tropes and again like turning them on their heads in a very entertaining way. Oh, we have a friend who wants in. Hang on. You want to say hi? Oh, I know she does. Hello, Miss Daisy. Oh, she's so happy. But they both end up kind of going on this quest that Damien was going on, and I love fantasy romance books where they are traveling together, like if they're on a quest or if they're just getting from like one place to another together. I love what that does for the story. I just feel like the prolonged forced proximity with them stopping at all of these inns and taverns and them having to come up with all of these lies for why they're traveling together always just makes for one of the most fun fantasy romance dynamics for me personally. I absolutely loved the first and second books in this trilogy. The third one is definitely the weakest one in my opinion, but like it's still a fun time. Next I want to talk about one which is a little bit unexpected. Daisy is coming to say hello. And that is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. Now this one is definitely more heavy on the fantasy elements than it is on the romance, but I still really liked the romance and it was a key part of why I liked this book so much. I know Brandon Sanderson does get a bad rep for writing romances, but like honestly for the most part I really enjoy most of the romances that are featured within his books. I feel like they're really great subplots to focus on and they do add a lot to the actual story. He definitely has some that I don't like. There's one specifically in Stormlight that I really hate. The 2 of them together just get on my nerves, but the 2 of them in this book together do not get on my nerves. And it's got such a great fantasy world to go with it. It's just so good. Basically in this one, we are set on 2 different worlds. In one of them, we are following our main character, Painter, who is a nightmare painter. And basically he lives in this very like metropolitan area, but they go around the city and stop nightmares from plaguing people by like vanquishing them or painting them or something to that effect. And then we're following our other main character, Yumi, who lives in this much more like historical feeling, traditional kind of area where she is seen as this spiritual figure and her job is to like stack rocks all day. And through some turns of events, they end up being able to experience each other's lives in a very interesting way. They're obviously from 2 very different walks of life, so them trying to kind of acclimatize to the other's, you know, job and area they live in and world that they live on is so entertaining. And the romance that develops relationships between them throughout the book is just so cute, honestly. I do think you could maybe read this without having read any of the other books in the Cosmere. Like, you're gonna know what's going on and you're gonna enjoy it. It is a little bit more enjoyable if you can pick up on some of the Easter eggs, but like, you don't need to know them. But it was just such a different book for Brandon Sanderson to write in the Cosmere. It definitely surprised me, but in such a delightful way. I loved the world. I loved how the magic worked. I loved the characters. It was just really great all around. Next up, I want to talk about one of my favorite series, which if you guys haven't read, you need to. I mean, I know the series is very popular, but like, if you haven't read it for some reason, you need to read it. And that is obviously the Emily Wilde series by Heather Fawcett. I couldn't not put this on the list because it is one of my favorite series in general. It's definitely one of my favorite fantasy romance. Again, I think this one is a little bit heavier on the fantasy initially, but the romance that develops between our two main characters is one of my favorites. I love Emily and Wendell so much, like just so much. But basically this whole series is following our main character Emily, who is a Cambridge professor, and she studies dryadology, so she studies all things fairy, folklore, fairy tales, all that kind of stuff, which I obviously love. But throughout the books, you kind of see her going on these expeditions to these different places in Europe where she is going to study the folk of these areas. And her department rival, even though like he doesn't really think they're rivals, he just kind of gets on her nerves a lot, so she kind of thinks they're rivals, ends up tagging along on these expeditions, causing trouble for her. And she is just so annoyed and put out with him the whole time that it makes for such a fun dynamic to read about. I'm not gonna get into like the rest of the reasons why I love this series so much because I want to mainly focus on the romance, but like it has a great plot, great writing. I love all of Emily's like ramblings and wanderings throughout the European like countrysides that she's going to. So beautiful. But the romance between the two of them is so good because it's like Grumpy Sunshine but flipped, because Wendell is just like so flamboyant, so loud, out there, fun, and Emily is very like studious and serious and basically the antithesis of Wendell, which makes their dynamic just so fun to read about. So this is me imploring you to read the series. It's so good. It is one of my top favorite series of all time and probably will remain so for all time. So please read the Emily Wilde series. I love it so dearly. Next up, I do want to talk about another T. Kingfisher fantasy romance book, but I couldn't make the list without talking about Sword Heart, of course. I think this might... Is this set in the same... I think this is set in the same world as Paladin's Grace, but it is very much its own series. And the series is actually getting a sequel in August called Daggerbound, which I'm so excited about. Also, the cover was recently announced for it, and it's so beautiful. Like, look at... You don't have to go look it up. I'm gonna put it right here. Stunning. I need it. I will have it. But Sword Heart is following our main character, Hala, who lives with her terrible family, honestly. They hate her so much because a lot of money was left to her, so their whole goal is to, like, literally murder her so they can take her inheritance. So the beginning of this book, we open up, it's a little bit bleak, honestly, because she is trapped in this attic and she's trying to figure out how to just, like, be done with her family forever. So she notices this sword on the wall and she's like, like, maybe. So she ends up unsheathing the sword and like out pops this dude, and turns out like the dude is the sword. He was like trapped in the sword, and he is now like duty bound to protect her from her awful family. So they also end up kind of embarking on a little bit of it's not really a quest, they're kind of just traveling somewhere in this book. But as I said before, I love any book where they're traveling together. The fact that he's a sword just makes this book so unconventional compared to like typical fantasy romance books. They end up encountering quite a few adversaries along the way. Sarkis is always like laying his life down for Hala because like that's kind of the point of being trapped in one of the swords. Like you have to protect the person that pulled you out of the sword basically. And it's just super fun. I love Sword Heart. It's so fun. It's so funny. I just feel like T. Kingfisher knows how to do fun, different, unique fantasy romance stories. So love Sword Heart. I feel like I'm gonna love Daggerbound. I can't wait for just more from this series. Then next up, I want to talk about a book which I feel like I haven't talked about in a while, but like I love this book so much, and that is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is another historical, like, fantasy romance, but like with fairies kind of book. This one is set in Regency England, and we are following our main character Dora, who has half a soul. She had half of her soul taken from her by a fairy when she was very young, which has kind of left her devoid of certain emotions, which definitely makes her stand out a little bit in Regency England until she catches the eye of this local sorcerer whose name is Elias. He is very fascinated by her and her situation, and he kind of takes it upon himself to figure out what's going on. I feel like Elias has major Howl vibes from Howl's Moving Castle. He's a very moody, over-the-top sorcerer, but in a way that I absolutely love, and I love how his dynamic develops with Dora over the course of this book. There's this whole scene where they're at a ball and they dance together, and I will never forget it. It is ingrained in my brain. I love that scene so much. Just thinking about it now, it's so good. I love that while this book does focus a lot on the romance, it also focuses a lot on kind of a lot of the social issues of the time. Elias is very done with society, people who literally only care about themselves when there are all of these atrocities happening in the world right under their noses. And I love seeing the steps that he takes to kind of counteract that in his own ways. And I just love Have a Soul so much. It is so whimsical, so fun, definitely a little bit dark and grim at times, but not too much. And it is like the perfect spring read. If you want a good like spring read, you should read Have a Soul. And then the last book that I want to talk about today is, is this the only YA? This might be my only YA book on this list. I have other like YA fantasy romance leaning books that like I would always recommend. You should read The Cruel Prince. You should read The Infernal Devices. You should read The Last Hours. But like I talk about those a fair amount, so I feel like I don't talk about this one as much. If you want the perfect spooky, moody, gothic fantasy romance that you should pick up probably in like September, October, you should definitely pick up Belladonna by Adeline Grace. In this one we are following our main character Signa, who has been like bounced back and forth between a bunch of different guardians in her life because they keep dying. At the point in her life that we're following her, she is living with her last remaining relatives who live in this beautiful, gothic, creepy mansion in the middle of nowhere. And her relatives are definitely interesting people to say the least, and her cousin has this like life-threatening illness that nobody knows how she got. Throughout the book we also learn that Signa has a very interesting relationship with death, definitely a little bit antagonistic, but like maybe a little bit more than that. It's got great atmosphere, it's got a little hint of a mystery running through it, so definitely would recommend this if you're looking for a little bit of a spookier fantasy romance to add to your list. I have read the second book in this series, which I didn't really love as much. Initially I was planning on reading the last book in the series, but I never got around to it, and I feel like I don't remember enough about the other two books now to fully jump into the third one, but I would reread the first one. This one is the most gothic and spooky out of all of them, so like obviously I would reread this. So those are my, I think it was 9 fantasy romance recommendations that I have for you. I do love some fantasy romance every now and then. I feel like my taste in fantasy romance has changed quite a bit over the years, but like right now, I would say these 9 books definitely kind of like sum up my fantasy romance tastes. They are all just so fun, many of them very whimsical, so enjoyable. So I would obviously love to know if you guys have read any of these, or if you have any fantasy romance recommendations for me. I would love to hear based on this list if you guys have any that you would recommend to me, so please do leave some suggestions down below. But with that, I'm gonna let you guys go, so thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you're having a great whatever day it is that you're watching this video, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!